She thought she could hide her grief in the dark of row 1, but Elvis saw everything. On June 18, 1972, at the Las Vegas Hilton, while 18,000 fans roared, a widow's quiet tears caught his eye. And what the king did next changed the whole room's heart. The Las Vegas Hilton showroom was alive before anyone even walked on stage. People were fanning themselves with ticket stubs. The air smelled like warm perfume mixed with cigarette smoke drifting out from the cocktail section. A low hum filled the space, the kind that makes your chest feel like it's buzzing. It was June 18, 1972, one of Elvis Presley's most packed Hilton nights, and almost 18,000 people squeezed in tightly, waiting for the king to appear. When the house lights dimmed, the crowd exploded. Camera flashes burst like tiny fireworks across the front rows. The orchestra swelled. A few people stood on chairs just to catch a glimpse of the white jumpsuit they knew was about to appear. Then he stepped into the golden spotlight, Elvis, in the bright Thunderbird suit that caught every reflection in the room. The brass hit the opening notes of C.C. Rider, and the whole place shook as if it had been waiting centuries for that exact sound. But while everyone else was swept into the excitement, Elvis paused for half a second longer than he usually did. His eyes scanned the front row, not in a nervous way, but in that strange performer's instinct, the one where he seemed to see people individually, even in massive crowds. The audience didn't notice it, but he did. One figure sat hunched near the middle of row 1. A woman, still, quiet, her hands clasped around something red, her head slightly bowed. Even though she tried to blend into the chaos, something about her didn't belong to the celebration happening around her. Elvis kept singing, but his gaze returned to her again and again. What makes someone stand out in a sea of faces? And how does a performer notice the one person who isn't cheering? The crowd surged as the band locked into the groove. Electric guitars slid under the brass. The backup singers harmonized. The audience clapped along, some offbeat, some too loudly, some so emotional they cried from pure excitement. The showroom felt like a carnival mixed with a church. But in the middle of it all, Elvis's attention continued flicking back to that single quiet shape in the front. As the song rolled on, flashes bounced across her face, and for a moment he caught the shine of something wet on her cheek. A tear, maybe two. She brushed them away fast, like she hoped no one had seen. But he had. His body shifted, just a small lean forward, as if trying to understand something the music couldn't tell him. The mic crackled when Elvis pulled it slightly closer. The sound made the nearest rows fall quiet for just a moment, like they wondered if something unexpected was about to happen. But the band carried on unaware. The drums thumped steadily. The horns played their rehearsed lines. The dancers in the upper aisles cheered and stomped their heels. But Elvis's voice softened. Not enough for the whole crowd to notice, but enough to make the first few rows lean in. His focus had changed. The energy had shifted. You could feel it the way you can feel weather changing before you see the clouds. Why did he care so quickly? What invisible signal had he heard in the middle of all that noise? At that moment, the woman finally lifted her head. Her face showed something deeper than sadness. Something heavy, like she was trying her best not to fall apart in front of thousands. She clutched the red cloth tighter. Elvis saw it. And right then, he leaned forward, as if listening for something only he could hear. Her name was Martha Ellison, 42 years old, from Santa Rosa, California. A quiet woman who never imagined she'd be sitting in the front row of an Elvis Presley concert. But life had forced her into moments she never asked for. And this moment was one of them. She kept her shoulders pulled in, trying to make herself smaller as the crowd around her cheered. People were laughing, shouting Elvis's name, waving signs they'd painted in their hotel rooms. But Martha barely lifted her head. She held a faded red scarf in her hands, twisting it slowly. That scarf had once belonged to her husband, Michael. He had passed away 3 months earlier after a sudden accident on the army base where he worked as a mechanic. She had told herself she wouldn't cry tonight. She had told herself she was strong enough to attend the concert for both of us. Words she whispered the night she found Michael's change jar on the dresser with the note he'd left months earlier. For Vegas someday. That jar had paid for her plane ticket, her hotel, and her single front row seat. She had kept the receipt tucked inside her purse like a tiny promise she wasn't ready to let go of. But grief does not listen to promises. And under the bright Hilton stage lights, the world can see every tear. When Elvis moved into the next song, the crowd roared. People stood again. Cameras flashed. But Martha stayed seated, head lowered, fingers locked around the scarf. The music was too familiar, too close. Elvis was singing "Love Me Tender," the exact song that had played at her wedding 20 years earlier. The opening guitar note felt like a hand reaching into her chest. Her breath began to shake. She bit her lip, trying to hold everything inside. A woman beside her nudged her husband, whispering, "She's crying." But Martha didn't hear her. Or maybe she did and simply didn't care. She lifted the scarf to her face and shut her eyes tight. Then it happened. Elvis's voice softened, just barely, but enough for anyone paying attention to feel the shift. His gaze locked on the red scarf, locked on Martha. He sang the next line slower, as if he were speaking it instead of singing it. The crowd didn't know what caused the change, but they felt it. The front rows leaned in, sensing a new weight in the air. The mic echoed faintly as he stepped closer to the edge of the stage. That single step changed everything. People lowered their drinks. The laughter faded. Even the casino noise leaking through the showroom doors seemed to disappear. Martha tried wiping her tears with the back of her hand, but the lights caught the shine on her cheeks. She turned slightly to the side, embarrassed. But Elvis kept watching. His eyes softened, the way someone looks when they recognize a feeling they've carried themselves. The band kept playing, unaware of the invisible thread forming between the stage and row one. How do you hide grief in a room this bright? And why does pain grow louder when a song knows your story? Martha lowered the scarf to her lap and stared at it. This simple piece of cloth had traveled with her everywhere in the past months. Funeral, flights, hotel room. A small reminder of the man she had loved. A reminder of a life she was still learning to live without. And under those golden Hilton lights, she realized she was being seen. Not by the crowd. Not by the ushers. By Elvis. Mid-lyric he paused. Not a mistake. Not a forgotten line. A choice. The kind of pause that cracks a room wide open. And in that silence, the crowd felt something shift. Something they couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. What would you have done if you were her? Spotlit by accident, grief exposed in the middle of a celebration you came to survive. Martha looked up. Her eyes met his. The music hesitated with him. And then everything changed. At first, almost no one understood what was happening. The band kept playing, the brass shining through the speakers, the rhythm steady and loud. But Elvis wasn't moving the way he usually did. He wasn't dancing across the stage or throwing scarves to the audience. He was staring, focused, still, and deep into the front row. And that alone was enough to make a few people lower their drinks and whisper to each other. Charlie Hodge, standing just a few feet behind him with a guitar ready, noticed the shift immediately. He leaned in and asked softly, "Elvis, you want me to help her out? Move her to the side." His voice barely carried over the music, but Elvis heard him. He didn't answer. He just lifted two fingers. A quiet signal. Calm. Controlled. Charlie froze. That gesture meant something important. It meant stay back. Another security guard, thinking the woman might be sick, stepped closer to the aisle. His shoes tapped quickly across the floor. But Elvis turned his head slightly and gave the smallest shake. The guard stopped mid-step, confused. He looked around the room as if expecting someone else to explain what he was feeling. The audience sensed tension too. A ripple moved through the rows. Whispers, shifting bodies, people craning their necks to understand why the king had slowed down. The lights, normally dancing across the walls, seemed to tighten around him, drawing a circle of gold. The band felt it as well. The strings softened. One violinist glanced at the conductor, unsure whether to keep playing or fade out. The conductor motioned gently downward, guiding the music into something quieter, warmer, almost fragile. And the crowd went silent. 18,000 people, all caught between excitement and confusion, holding their breath in a room built for noise. The silence was so sudden that you could hear the soft hum of the stage monitors. A glass clinked in the far back. Somewhere, a camera rewound. Tiny sounds that never mattered before suddenly felt huge. What changes an entire room with a single pause? And why did everyone feel the same strange pull, even without knowing the reason? Elvis stepped forward. One slow step, then another. His boots caught the spotlight, and the shine reflected along the front rows like a signal. Every eye followed him. He moved with purpose, not rushing, not hesitating. Just steady, certain. People leaned in closer. Shoulders pressed together. A woman whispered, "Is someone hurt?" Another man whispered, "He never stops mid-song." The tension wasn't panic. It was curiosity mixed with something deeper, something like concern. And then came the pattern breaker moment. He stopped singing. Just stopped. The band didn't crash. The audience didn't scream. The room simply froze. The microphone caught a soft breath, the kind you hear right before someone says something important. The moment felt stretched, like time was waiting. Martha sat completely still. She didn't know why he was looking at her. She didn't know the entire room was now staring in her direction. Her fingers tightened around the red scarf. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed, but she could still feel his attention like warmth on her skin. Elvis lifted the mic slightly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to yet. His eyes told everyone to wait. Charlie took a step forward again, worried. "Boss," he whispered. Elvis raised his hand gently, stopping him. The gesture wasn't sharp or annoyed. It was soft, protective. And that's when the crowd began to understand this wasn't a disruption. It wasn't someone causing trouble. It wasn't illness or danger. It was something human, something fragile, something the music itself had paused to make room for. How fast can a celebration turn into concern? How quickly does a performer become a protector? Elvis took one more step toward the edge of the stage. The lights followed him. The band lowered their volume further, sensing his focus. The audience leaned forward so far that some people almost touched the stage. And then, with absolute certainty, Elvis made a choice no one expected in a sold-out Vegas showroom. He knelt at the edge of the stage, the golden spotlight forming a quiet circle around him. 18,000 people fell silent at once, their cheers fading into a soft, trembling hush. Elvis held the microphone loosely, almost as if he were afraid to disturb the moment. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Martha, the widow clutching the red scarf like a lifeline. For a second, even the band seemed unsure whether to continue or surrender to the stillness. Glenn Hardin glanced up from his piano, waiting for any cue, any gesture, any sign at all. Elvis finally inhaled, a slow, steady breath that carried through the mic like a quiet ripple. He didn't speak. Not yet. Words felt too heavy for the air they were standing in. Instead, he reached one hand out toward her, palm open, gentle, steady, full of understanding. The crowd reacted with a soft gasp, the kind that rises when a room witnesses something sacred. Martha froze, unsure if he truly meant her, unsure whether to look away or look back. Elvis lowered himself slowly, knees touching the edge of the stage, bringing him just inches above her eye line. He whispered into the mic, voice soft enough to break a heart and gentle enough to heal one. "Honey, this one's for you." It was only 5 words, but they moved through the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't scream. They just watched, holding their breath like witnesses to history. Elvis nodded gently to Glenn Hardin, who understood immediately and shifted into the soft opening chords. The first notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" drifted across the room like a warm wind. People felt it instantly, the song, the silence, the meaning behind his choice to change everything mid-show. Elvis didn't look at the cameras, or the lights, or the massive crowd waiting for the spectacle to resume. He looked only at Martha, as if she were the entire room, as if her grief deserved the whole stage. Short sentences, short breaths, short motions. His voice softened into something close to prayer, smoothing out every sharp edge left inside her chest. The crowd leaned forward so far that the ushers held out their hands, afraid people might fall. Martha lifted the red scarf slowly, her hands trembling as she raised it into the golden light. Elvis saw it instantly. His face changed. His breath caught. He pressed a hand to his chest, the gesture small but full of understanding that went beyond words. Something in Martha broke open, not in pain this time, but in recognition. Someone finally saw her whole story. The music wrapped around them, tender and steady, a bridge between her past and the moment unfolding now. People wiped their eyes without shame, moved by a moment that felt too personal to belong to strangers. Elvis leaned just a little closer, voice lowering even further, as if offering her a safe place to breathe. He sang the next line directly to her, the world around them fading until it felt like two people alone. No cameras mattered. No recordings mattered. No headlines mattered. Only the moment between a grieving widow and a singer who understood what broken hearts sound like. And then, just when the room thought it had seen everything, Martha lifted the scarf higher. Elvis's eyes widened, a quiet shock passing through him, as if the scarf carried a story he already knew. The band kept playing, but the moment took on a life of its own, raw, human, unforgettable. What would you have felt if a song reached into your memories this deeply, this suddenly, this completely? The crowd waited, breathless, as the next second unfolded like the beginning of something life-changing. And in that fragile pause, something inside Elvis decided what must happen next. Everything was about to shift again. Everything. Right now. When Elvis saw the red scarf raised higher, something inside him shifted. His expression softened even more, and the people in the front rows felt the change as clearly as a temperature drop. He pressed his hand to his heart, not as a gesture for the audience but as a silent message to Martha. A message that said, "I see you. I understand." The band eased into a lighter, gentler rhythm. Drums softened to brushes. Bass lowered to a heartbeat. The violins grew faint, barely more than a whisper behind his voice. Glenn Harden watched Elvis carefully, adjusting each chord to match whatever emotional current was flowing through the room. James Burton moved his fingers slower along the guitar strings, creating a warm cushion of sound. Even Sylvia Shemwell, standing behind her microphone, slowed her breathing as if the moment required absolute stillness. 18,000 people had come to dance, scream, cheer, and celebrate. But now they sat motionless, watching a moment that felt too fragile to disturb. A few people held hands. Some wiped tears they didn't expect. Others simply stared, realizing they were witnessing something they would talk about for decades. Elvis sang the next line quietly, letting each word fall gently toward Martha like a gift. His voice wasn't loud or showy. It was warm, careful, and oddly parental, as if he were holding her pain with both hands. Martha stared back at him, tears streaming freely now. She was no longer trying to hide them. The scarf trembled between her fingers, catching the golden light like a ribbon of memory. How does a simple song reach into someone's deepest hurt? And why do certain voices feel like they know our stories before we speak them? When Elvis reached the middle of the song, he did something almost no one in the audience had ever seen him do. He lowered himself from his kneeling position until he was sitting fully at the edge of the stage, legs hanging over, bringing him even closer to her. The spotlight followed him, narrowing subtly as if the lighting crew understood the moment without being told. Martha looked up, eyes red, breath shaking, unable to believe what she was witnessing. He sang directly to her now, not to row one, not to the Hilton, to her. Every note felt like a hand on her back, steadying her, reminding her she wasn't alone. The melody wrapped around the scarf, around her memories, around her grief, turning the crushing weight in her chest into something slightly lighter, something she could breathe through for the first time in months. People around her cried silently, overwhelmed. A man in the third row took off his hat. A woman in the aisle clasped her hands under her chin. Ushers, usually trained to stay still and neutral, paused to watch with soft eyes. Even the casino staff lingering near the doors leaned in, sensing a piece of history taking shape. Elvis's voice dipped into a lower, tender tone as he sang the final verse. His hand reached out again, open, steady. Martha lifted her free hand halfway, then lowered it again, overwhelmed, unsure whether she should take such an intimate offer. Elvis smiled gently, not pushing, simply holding the space for her. And then something subtle yet powerful happened. Martha began mouthing the lyrics with him. Two voices, one grieving and one comforting, singing the same words at the same time. The audience exhaled as if the moment touched something universal inside them. A shared grief became a shared healing. The music swelled softly, never overpowering the intimate connection between singer and widow. When the final note floated into the quiet air, Elvis kept his gaze on her, letting the silence complete the moment better than any applause could. For a few seconds, no one moved, not even Elvis. Then the crowd erupted. Cheers, tears, applause that shook the showroom walls. People stood, clapping above their heads, shouting his name. But Elvis didn't look away from her until she finally lowered the scarf and gave him the smallest, grateful nod. And just like that, the moment passed. After the show, as people poured into the lobby with stories already forming in their mouths, a stranger approached Martha quietly. A man holding a small object. Cassette. "Your moment," he whispered. The lobby of the Las Vegas Hilton buzzed with the kind of energy that comes after people witness something they can't fully explain. Voices overlapped, hands waved in excitement, and strangers talked to each other like old friends. But Martha moved slowly through the noise, still holding the red scarf close to her chest. Her heartbeat hadn't found a steady rhythm yet. She felt changed and fragile, as if one wrong step might break the spell of what had just happened. A man approached her, quiet, middle-aged, wearing a simple denim jacket. He held a small cassette tape in his hand. "I recorded tonight," he whispered, almost shy. "Not official, just for myself. But this belongs to you." His voice trembled slightly, as if giving away the tape meant giving away something sacred. Martha stared at the cassette. A tiny handwritten label read, "Hilton, June 18th, 72, A17. She looked up, stunned. "Why me?" He smiled gently. "Because the song wasn't for us. It was for you." She took the tape carefully, as if it were made of glass. Tears welled again, but these were softer, grateful, not heavy. The man nodded once and disappeared into the crowd before she could even ask his name. All she remembered was the kindness in his eyes. Word of the moment spread through the casino within minutes. By the next morning, a local newspaper printed a small headline tucked along the bottom of the front page. "Elvis stops concert to sing to widow." It wasn't the biggest story in the world, but it was the kind of story people clipped and kept inside drawers because it reminded them that compassion still existed. Hotel staff talked about it for weeks. Stagehands whispered about it backstage, replaying the moment when Elvis knelt. One usher said, "I've worked here 8 years. Never seen him stop like that. Not once." Even tourists who hadn't attended the show repeated the story as if they had. Months later, the Hilton placed a small bronze plaque behind the stage wall. It wasn't flashy. It didn't interrupt the decor. It simply read, "June 18th, 1972. The night compassion led the show. Performers touched it for luck. Crew members tapped it before long shifts. Some just looked at it and smiled. Why do the quietest acts echo the longest? Why do moments of kindness carve deeper memories than any spotlight ever could?" Martha joined a small Elvis fan group that fall. She didn't talk much at first, but people welcomed her, recognizing her from the story. Friendships formed easily. She wasn't alone anymore. But decades later, long after the concert lights faded, Martha would reveal a detail no one had ever heard. Changed everything. Martha often avoided interviews, but one afternoon, decades after that night at the Hilton, she finally agreed to speak to a local reporter. Her hair had turned silver, and the red scarf rested across her lap like a familiar friend. She held the cassette too. Its label faded, its plastic slightly cracked from age, but it still worked, and she still remembered every second. She told the reporter something she had never shared with anyone outside her closest friends. She said the moment Elvis sang to her wasn't just healing. It was the last promise she had made to her husband. On the night he died, she whispered to him she would find one moment in the world where she could breathe again. She didn't know how or when. She only knew she owed him a tiny piece of peace. And that night, Elvis unknowingly gave it to her. She said, "He didn't just sing to me. He sang to who I lost." Her voice trembled, but not from sadness. It trembled from gratitude. The reporter wrote in his notes that she smiled the entire time she spoke about the song, as if the memory itself warmed the room. Music isn't just sound. Sometimes it's a lifeline pulled from the darkness. Sometimes one voice in a crowd of thousands reaches the one heart that needed saving. What song has carried you through a moment you thought you'd never survive? And who would you give that same light to today? Before the interview ended, Martha placed the cassette gently into a small wooden box. She said she wanted it to stay safe long after she was gone. She explained stories like hers mattered because they reminded people to look for kindness in places. She hoped the tape would pass through hands and give comfort to someone who might find strength. The reporter asked why. Martha looked at the box, then at the scarf and whispered, "Because someone else might need this story someday." The tape, her record of that night, would resurface 34 years later. Always, if the story touched you, share it with someone who might need a little light tonight. Sometimes a single voice, a single song, or a single act of kindness can change a life. Tell us in the comments. What moment of compassion do you still carry with you after all these years?